I had a customer reach out to me recently and ask how can they conditionally set the lookup in a repeating section, the second lookup in a repeating section to be mandatory if a condition is true on the first lookup. So anytime I'm working with a lookup, I recommend to work out the inner workings, first put some labels on just so you can output what you're seeing. So by that I mean come into here and put your form control into a label just so you can see what you're dealing with. So you can either do it that way or you can go last name and find out the field there. If you go to preview, what you'll notice is this is the way that data is stored in SharePoint for lookups. It's actually the ID, the semicolon hash delimiter, and then the value. So this customer, I think what they're having the problem with is they're trying to do a string match on this, and it's probably just not matching. So they wanted us to say, if the value starts with K, then go and make last name mandatory. The scenario here is a bit silly, but you get the idea. So I don't think that's ever going to match. So what we want to do here is first we want to separate the value from the ID. So what we want to do is create a new variable, and we'll use the function called Parse Lookup. Now the Parse Lookup, I can't call it Parse Lookup because it's restricted. So we'll say first name value. Now, if you come to Parse Lookup, what that does is it actually separates it's got two options. You can separate the ID and have the ID or the value. So if I come to here and say Parse Lookup, and then we'll come to variables, come through the collection and put first name in there. Now you've got two options, true or false. Now true is going to give you the value. False is going to give you the ID. Now we won't go through this. I've got plenty of videos on how to learn about these sort of functions, but we're going to use this variable and put it just below here to see what happens when we do that function. So we'll go insert, go to preview, we'll select something, and now you can see that through that function, we've now got the true value of what has been selected, what's being displayed in the dropdown. Now, if I was to put, let's change that for a moment, let's put false. Go to preview and Kelly, now it's coming with number 1. So we obviously don't want the ID because IDs, as good as they are, we actually want to do a string match on what the user sees. So Kelly, right, so we're good to go. Now we want to know if, let's say the scenario is if the name begins with K, we want to make the last name mandatory. Now there's a few ways of doing this. What I would probably do first to keep it simple is I would continue to use this variable. So I would build this up a bit more and I would say, okay, so we've got the name Kelly. So you might want to do something like a substring first. So substring, and the way this works is you get the substring in and you'll say, this is what I've got. I've got this string. And then you've got the rest of it, which is what character you're starting from 0. So K, which is for Kelly, is 0, and then throughout. So we're going to start at 1. How many characters do you want? I only want 1. I only want to know if the name starts with K. So first name, first character. All right, so we'll go and update that, and we'll come back to preview, select Kelly, and now we can see just the letter K. Now we know that this dropdown, it starts with K, or it could start with whatever you want. Then we can go and do a rule, or there's another way I'll show in a moment. So first thing we want to do is repeating section gardeners. So we want to look inside the repeating section because the controls are inside the repeating section. Check if first name starts with K. Then these two controls only exist inside the repeating section, but we're not really interested in those because they give us the 1 semicolon hash, so on and so forth. So we want to insert. We're going to get to our variable that we had before. So we insert that and equals K. That probably should do it. And then last name required is true, else last name required is false. Okay. Now I've gone pretty fast and I'll hopefully explain this a little bit better in a moment. Select Kelly, now it's become required. Select Hilda, not required. Add a new row. Select Ryan, not required. Kelly, required. So you can see that while this variable is sitting on its own, we are contextually using that in that rule because the rule knows it's inside the repeating section. So as you can see here, so it's always checking if K is the first letter. So it's stepping through this one more time. So the lookup always returns the ID, a semicolon hash delimiter value. So the first step we did was we did a parse lookup in, which is this function here. Now that was good because it just got the Kelly part. The next part, we wanted to know just a portion of that string. So then we used the substring. So we said, we'll start at the start of the string, and then only give me one character. Now if you need 2 or 3 or 4, just increase that number at the end. Once we had that variable, then we could go to rules. And then the rule we said, we set where the rule applies. The rule applies inside the row. So then we said, okay, inside the row, we then went to insert and we used that variable we created before, which is going to check based on the current row. If, let me think, the current row, all it's doing is just saying, give me the first letter of this string which the parse lookup got you, which is fine. And then we said equals K. So it could be K or 150, whatever you want it to be. And you say, well, if it's true, then it's required, else it's not required. So that's how it works. It builds up very quickly. I understand it's probably quite complicated. And as we go through it, it's conditionally setting this second last name. The next step I would then do is just clean up your labels. You don't need those anymore. The variable we do, the rule we do, but everything else I think we're pretty good. So let's publish that and let's go to my list and let's see if it actually works. Just refresh SharePoint. It doesn't seem to be behaving today. There we go. Okay, new. Okay, Kelly, required. So if I go to submit, it tells me it's required. Hilda, submit. It's all fixed. So then there's a few other options you do have here. Now, if you didn't want to do a rule, or if you find that's just, you want to up the ante, do something a bit more complicated, you can turn that rule off. And so if I come back to preview and you say, see, now it's not working because we turned that rule off. Now, what's the other way? You could also come into down the bottom. Required also has the ability to have logic on it on the dropdown as well. So you don't have to do it. It depends on how complex your logic is. If the letter's K and it's Tuesday and all those sort of things, probably do it in rules. But if you wanted something simple, you could also just manage it through here. So we could go and get the variable here. We can't actually, we can get something similar to that. So we'll copy that out. And we can just put a formula in there. So substring, actually, we've got that. Let's copy that. So what we're saying is required, it's conditional and does not match Boolean. So what that means is it's only required as yes or no. Is it required yes or is it required no? Now this is returning K or whatever the first letter is. So how do we extend this to be a yes no? What you need to do is, so now this is, let's say it's returning the first character. So then you need to say equals K. So now it's Boolean. Does the first letter of that function equal K? And you can insert that now. So it's the same sort of thing, just getting into more powerful types of scenarios. Hilda, Kelly, Hilda. So there you go. So that's another way you can also make this work as well. There's so many different ways of solving this, but I think rules is probably easier. And so if you don't want to use rules, you can actually delete that variable. You could delete that rule. And now it'll still work because we've put our logic into, if I click here, into this function. So the function here is really helpful. If you wanted to have fewer rules and fewer variables, you can just put your logic on the form control property. So yeah, so that's how you can do it. You can certainly do conditional logic inside a repeating section with 2 lookup controls, a few different ways. So hopefully that makes sense. Certainly let me know in the comments if you've got any other questions. Cheers.